This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Castro Camera was the kind of small business that wasn't very good at being a business. It barely, if ever, turned a profit. But in the 1970s, it was a community hub for gay San Francisco. A sign in the front window said, "Yes, we are very open."
There would just be people hanging out there all day long, shooting the shit, basically.
Anne Cronenberg spent a lot of time at the store.
The Kodak Kodachrome film hanging from the walls and the big purple-red velvet couch. Talk about bare bones. I mean, this was not some upscale camera shop.
The term camera shop hardly even applied. The store couldn't afford to stock many cameras, so it mostly just rented out equipment and developed people's film.
Danny, who worked behind the counter, would look through all the rolls of film before he gave them out and see what, if there was any porn in there or whatever, and then pass all those pictures around. So it was just a crazy place.
The shop took up the whole ground floor of a 2-story Victorian on Castro Street. The owner lived upstairs. His name was Harvey Milk. Anne still remembers the first time she met him.
He was in the back of the shop and he was screaming at the top of his lungs at someone. Like, what is going on? And to tell you the truth, I was pretty intimidated.
In the mid-1970s, Harvey Milk was the unofficial mayor of Castro Street. His quick temper was usually quick to subside, and he laughed as loud as he yelled. And even though he had never held elected office, he had a knack for bringing people together.
Well, 2 years ago, I proposed the idea of a street fair and produced it. And it was phenomenally successful.
Harvey started the Castro Street Fair to prove the gay community had economic power and to bring money to the neighborhood. He also registered thousands of gay people to vote. But he never saw himself as an activist for gay people alone.
If I'm fighting for the rights of gay people, and I am, then I must fight for the rights of all people, or I'm a hypocrite.
He was very careful to always look for some sort of common ground.
That's Cleve Jones. In our first episode, we met up at a motel in the Castro. Cleve worked closely with Harvey Milk in the 1970s.
He could talk to a wealthy white lady up on Nob Hill. He could talk to a homeless street kid. And he would find that little commonality, and then he would build on that.
Harvey was developing a real grassroots following in the Castro. And in the mid-1970s, he started making inroads with straight leaders. He didn't have to go far to start building a political network. The regional head of the Teamsters lived just a few blocks from Castro Camera.
Harvey immediately understood just how momentously important it could be if we could build a coalition with the labor movement.
Gay activists were typically all about solidarity and often found their politics aligned with unions. But maybe not this one.
This was the damn Teamsters, who were considered one of the more conservative unions who had supported Nixon. The Teamsters? Are you kidding? They're going to beat the crap out of you.
Harvey wasn't worried about the Teamsters' reputation, and the union leader who lived down the street thought Harvey's gay organizing could help them take down a common enemy, the Coors Brewing Company.
Tempers are really hot in this beer strike, and negotiations are completely stalemated.
The Teamsters had launched a strike and a boycott against Coors because the company was discriminating against Latinos and refusing to hire union truckers.
We're in this store asking the store owner or the manager to remove the beer from the store. We hope every store will follow suit and do the same thing.
Coors wasn't just union busting. The company was deeply enmeshed in all kinds of right-wing causes, and it was notoriously homophobic. Coors actually forced job applicants to take polygraph tests to prove they were straight. Harvey told the Teamsters leader that he could get gays to stop drinking Coors, but he wanted something in exchange. The Teamsters would have to start hiring gay truckers. The union eventually got on board, and in 1974, Harvey and his allies got to work.
Just saying, look, here, if you're buying Coors beer, you are enriching a family that is using that money to take away your rights. And let's show people that we've got power.
Soon, it was impossible to buy a Coors at any gay bar in San Francisco.
That was dramatic. You know, you could have people going out in the street and emptying Coors into the sewer.
The company's chairman, William Coors, admits the boycott has been successful.
We have suffered a loss of image in the marketplace.
Gays in other parts of California joined the boycott too, and sales of Coors fell by 1/3 across the state.
It's such an important moment in history because there had been a few minor situations where gay people and labor unions had worked together, but this was our first alliance.
The Coors boycott showed that gay people in San Francisco could make themselves heard, but there was only so much they could do in politics without one of their own on the inside. And the unofficial mayor of Castro Street thought he was ready for the job. This is Slow Burn, Gays Against Briggs. I'm your host, Christina Cauterucci. In 1977, Harvey Milk was a charismatic political upstart, determined to win his community the respect and the rights it deserved. John Briggs was hoping to capitalize on a growing backlash to everything Harvey represented. Together, they would rise to national recognition, each making his name in opposition to the other. And as Briggs got closer to putting his gay teacher ban on the ballot, it started to dawn on Harvey and his allies that it would be up to them to stop him.
This law, Proposition 6, is misguided, dangerous, deceitful, frightening, and un-American.
This is episode 3, Harvey Milk versus the Machine. There's now a game-changing product to use before a night out with drinks. It's called ZBiotics. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, it's tough to bounce back the next day. You have to make a choice. You can either have a great night or a great next day. ZBiotics is a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/slowburn to get 15% off your first order when you use Slowburn at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/slowburn and use the code SLOWBURN at checkout for 15% off.
Harvey Milk never knew who he was for the longest time. He went through so many incarnations.
Cleve Jones again.
But with Harvey, people loved him. People wanted to be around Harvey.
Harvey Milk was born in 1930 and grew up in a Jewish family just outside New York City. After college, he spent 4 years in the Navy. But when Harvey's superiors discovered he was gay, they forced him to resign and gave him a less than honorable discharge.
He managed to hide that. He had forged papers that said he got an honorable discharge.
Lillian Faderman wrote a biography of Harvey Milk. She says Harvey spent his 20s searching for purpose. He sold sewing machines for a while and got hired as an assistant manager at a department store. Then, in the mid-1950s, Harvey found work that felt more meaningful. He got a job as a high school teacher on Long Island, but he only stuck around for a year.
Harvey was a wonderful teacher, but he was also living with a man, and he was really afraid that it would be discovered. And I think that's what went into his deciding that he needed to quit teaching.
For Harvey, the prospect of being outed wasn't just an abstract fear. Like a lot of gay men, he'd been harassed by the police. The year before he started teaching, he was arrested in Miami in what a police sergeant called a routine crackdown on perverts.
In the gay male bars, undercover policemen were often sent in, and hundreds of gay men were marched into paddy wagons.
That run-in with the police could have gotten Harvey fired from a lot of jobs, including teaching. No matter where he moved, and he moved a lot, there was always a conflict between his personal life and his professional one. He was dating and hooking up, but in public, he was closeted. By the early 1960s, in all kinds of ways, he was still figuring out who he wanted to be.
He had a good math background, so he found a job on Wall Street.
Harvey was in his 30s then, and he started dating Jack Galen McKinley, who was 17 at the time. The year before, Jack had dropped out of high school and moved to Greenwich Village, leaving behind his fundamentalist Christian family. Sodomy was still illegal in New York, so when Harvey saw his straight coworkers around town, he told them that Jack was his ward. Harvey would date a lot of young men, though not usually quite so young, and he seemed to enjoy the role of cultural mentor, taking his partners to museums and ballets, and he really loved the theater.
He became an actor for a little while. He was actually an associate producer of a Broadway play, which flopped.
Harvey started leaning into the hippie culture of his new theater crowd. He grew his hair, grew a mustache, and started wearing love beads after work. But he was no radical. He had supported the arch-conservative presidential candidate Barry Goldwater, and the burgeoning gay rights movement wasn't really on his radar.
The disorders began with a routine police raid on a homosexual bar, the Stonewall, on Christopher Street, in the heart of the West Village.
Harvey was a Republican around the era of Stonewall.
Almost every homosexual who was in New York at the time of the Stonewall Rebellion has his own private memory of what took place.
Stonewall didn't mean a hell of a lot to him.
But Harvey did find meaning in his gay identity. And like tens of thousands of other gay Americans, he felt drawn to the city where it was easiest and most thrilling to get out of the closet and experience life in the open.
Come to San Francisco, because there, to be gay is to be proud and powerful.
Harvey first moved to San Francisco in 1969, when he was almost 40. The change of scenery accelerated his political awakening.
The day Nixon invaded Cambodia was the day I had to speak out against world profiteers, large corporations, and so forth.
In 1970, he went to a demonstration at the Pacific Stock Exchange and made a speech condemning the invasion. He also ceremonially cut up his Bank of America credit card. The whole thing got him fired from his job in finance.
And when I walked through that door, I kept walking and announced to the world that I also was gay. And it was like taking a huge burden off my back. I no longer had to live a double life.
Freed from the shackles of the closet, Harvey embraced the San Francisco counterculture.
He had a ponytail, and my first awareness of him was I was thinking that he was too old to be a hippie.
Cleve Jones was about 20 years younger than Harvey. He doesn't remember how they first met, but Harvey made a strong impression.
I just thought he was kind of silly. And then he also had this tradition every year on his birthday, somebody would pie him. A coconut cream pie, full in the face.
It was 1973 when Harvey opened Castro Camera with his new partner, Scott Smith. Around that time, 3 seemingly unrelated things happened that would change the course of his life. First, Harvey and Scott had to get a business license. It cost hundreds of dollars, and they could barely afford it.
He really felt that this had to be fought against, that it was real exploitation of people who wanted to open businesses.
Then, once they'd opened the shop, a public school teacher came in to rent a slide projector. Harvey asked her, "Why do you need to rent one? Don't they have them at school?" She said there weren't enough projectors for everyone.
And Harvey thought that was outrageous. There was all of this money going into paying for the police force, for undercover vice squad agents that would pick on the gay community when the money should be going to buy projectors for schools.
And finally, there was Watergate.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
Harvey watched the hearings every day on a portable TV that he brought down to the shop from his apartment.
Instead of tending to his customers every morning, he would swear at Nixon's henchmen and just say, "You son of a bitch." And sometimes the customers were scared away. Here was this crazy man, disheveled with a beard, swearing at a television set.
These 3 experiences changed Harvey and inspired him to do something he'd never considered before: run for public office.
They either had to go ahead and shut up and not buy the papers anymore, not watch my television anymore, or do something about it.
Openly gay candidates were almost totally unprecedented at the time. As far as anyone knows, there had only been 3 in American history. In 1973, Harvey Milk became the 4th. He ran for a seat on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, basically the city council.
If I win, I have an incredible responsibility to the city. But I also know I will carry the responsibility of the gay community.
As a political outsider, Harvey needed all the help he could get. And as the only openly gay candidate in the race, he thought he'd at least get the endorsement of San Francisco's Gay Political Association. That group, the Alice B. Toklas Democratic Club, was named for the longtime partner of the lesbian writer Gertrude Stein. It was a coded reference, one that allowed the group to avoid using the word gay. The Alice B. Toklas Club was old school and cautious. Its members believed the smartest strategy was to support straight Democrats who backed gay rights, like Dianne Feinstein, rather than wasting their political capital on a gay candidate who'd never win.
You know, they didn't want to rock the boat. They didn't like Harvey. Harvey was too raggedy. Harvey was too radical.
I was never supported by the gay establishment. And the reason why is if I won, they would no longer be the top of the hill. They don't realize that there's room at the top for a lot of people.
And at one point, one of these guys told him, you know, we're like the Catholic Church. We welcome converts, but we don't make them pope overnight.
Harvey never got that endorsement. And on election day, he lost big time. Harvey ran for office 2 more times in the next few years. Every time, he was the underdog, the candidate with no support from the political establishment. He tried to make that a selling point. One of his slogans was Harvey Milk versus the machine. Each time he ran, Harvey lost, and the machine won. His nonstop campaigning also cost him his relationship with Scott. But in the course of all those defeats, Harvey Milk was building his reputation.
Harvey was out there as a small businessman, but also an advocate.
The teacher, Tom Amiano, lived in the Castro in the 1970s.
He would be doing a leaflet thing. He had a little megaphone.
This was around the time that Harvey joined up with the Teamsters to boycott Coors beer. After that success, he found other ways to use gay buying power for the good of the community. When straight-owned businesses alienated their gay customers, Harvey made flyers calling them out.
Put it up on the telephone post. This business, Mike's Liquors, wants your money but treats you badly. And that did the trick. People stopped going to those businesses. And then, oh my God, you know, everybody came to Jesus within like a week. And Mike's Liquors was advertising for drag queens.
There was one moment when Harvey won Tom over forever. A bunch of straight men had come into the Castro and started beating up a gay guy. This happened all the time. Gay bashers would show up in the early hours of the morning as the bars closed and men poured onto the streets. On this night, people tried to help the man who was assaulted. Someone reported the attack to the police. But when the cops showed up, they started giving the victim a hard time.
And Harvey stepped out of the crowd and he took on the cops. You know, what are you doing here? Why are you bothering him? I mean, and that, my heart just exploded.
What we do, they may not like, but we have civil rights. I think in the future, any policeman who hassles anybody, gay, black, Chicano, or whatever, will think twice.
It was inspiring, and I wasn't the only one in the crowd who felt that way.
Harvey was coming into his own as a neighborhood leader and a voice for gay San Franciscans. He was also taking cues from the straight political leaders who'd started coming to him for advice and endorsements.
He changed his look, and it was quite astonishing. And he got a short conservative haircut and bought a couple of secondhand suits at a thrift store, a pair of wingtips.
Harvey was starting to look like a stronger political candidate, and not just because of his new clothes. The first 2 times he tried to get elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, he was running in a citywide system. That setup favored candidates with more money and a wider base of support. But in 1976, gays and unions worked together to change that system. Under the new rules, each supervisor would represent a smaller district within the city. That changed everything for Harvey. San Francisco's gay population was growing, and it was concentrated in his neighborhood.
Nearly 30% of the city's 315,000 registered voters are believed to be homosexual.
Neighborhoods really matter. It's not just about being safe and having friends. If we occupy certain precincts in large percentages, we can elect our own and defeat our enemies. It's about political power.
Now that neighborhoods had more electoral power, Harvey would have a real shot at getting on the Board of Supervisors. But in order to win, he'd need a lot of help. And he found some in an unlikely place.
I was working at a wholesale seafood company.
That's Ann Cronenberg again. In 1977, she was 23 years old. She was passionate about gay rights and her Honda 550 motorcycle. Her office job at a seafood wholesaler, not so much.
I was a pretty free spirit at that point, and here I am in corporate culture typing.
Ann was desperate to get out, but she never expected that the very loud owner of Castro Camera would be her ticket to a new career.
Harvey gave me a call, and to me, he was like a god. I knew who he was. I brought my film to the camera shop, but I had never talked to him, and I had no idea how he even got my name.
It turned out that a mutual friend had recommended Ann for a job with Harvey's campaign.
I mean, Harvey was really clear on the fact he needed to bring women in. He knew how important it was to form a coalition, that he couldn't get elected with just gay men.
Harvey didn't waste time. 5 minutes into their first conversation, he asked Ann to be his campaign manager.
I was like, geez, I don't know anything about running campaigns. I've never run a campaign before. And Harvey said, well, I know everything about them, so I'll teach you. He said, there is one catch. I can't pay you. Oh, okay. Well, I'll do it anyway.
Harvey did pay Ann's rent, and he fed her breakfast. He brought sweet rolls to Castro Camera every morning. By the time they'd meet up at the shop, Harvey would have been campaigning for hours. Then they'd spend the rest of the day corralling volunteers, knocking on doors, and giving out flyers.
Harvey was relentless. I don't know how the man had the energy he had. He was out at the bus stops at 5:36 in the morning, and he went till midnight.
Somehow, Harvey also made time to pursue a new boyfriend, a man in his 20s named Jack Lira. And he had to squeeze in fundraisers wherever he could. Harvey's campaign budget was tiny, just $7,700, less than 1/5 of the war chest of his closest competitor, a gay lawyer with close ties to the Democratic Party. But he had a talent for drawing people in, for sensing what was important to them and making them feel seen.
If the disenfranchised, and that includes just about all the traditional minorities, includes the handicapped, senior citizens, most gay people, a lot in the feminist movement, if they would all get together, we can change the city, but the city's priorities would be much more sensitive to the needs of people.
We had a lot of seniors who just loved their little Harvey. You know, we had this one woman who used to come in with her cookies she'd make that, truth be told, none of us wanted to eat because she couldn't see very well, and you never knew what was going to be in those cookies, but she'd bring them in every week for us.
It was during Harvey's 1977 run that John Briggs announced his proposal to purge gay teachers from California schools. Harvey started speaking out against the initiative and raised the stakes of his own local campaign. In an ad that ran in a gay newspaper, he said he could help the community take down John Briggs, so long as he got elected to the Board of Supervisors first.
I was a true believer from day one. I knew we would win. It never crossed my mind until Election Day itself, and then I was like, oh no, will we?
On election night, 1977, Anne and the rest of Harvey's supporters waited for the returns at Castro Camera. They couldn't afford to have a party anywhere else.
We had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people come crowding into the camera shop. It was electric.
Harvey had decided to wait for the results at City Hall, where he could get the precinct totals right away. And the fastest way to get there?
Harvey hated to ride on my motorcycle.
But on this night, he made an exception. While Anne held things down at the shop, her girlfriend Joyce took the Honda 550. Harvey climbed on behind her and held on as they roared off toward downtown.
Once it became clear that we were, in fact, winning, she brought him back on the bike, and I knew he was coming, and I told folks, and they just surrounded him and Joyce on the street and yanked him off. It's one of the best nights of my entire life.
It looks and sounds to me like New Year's Eve on Market Street. And the reason for all this merriment and gaiety, if you pardon the pun, the first gay supervisor elected in San Francisco, his name is Harvey Milk. First of all, congratulations, and I've never seen anything like this, Harvey.
Oh, it's all over the city tonight.
Does that mean, as many straights are concerned, that maybe the gays are taking over San Francisco? Are you going to be a supervisor for all the people?
I have to be. That's what I was elected for. The problems that affect this city affect all of us.
The joy that we felt, we had really done it, and we were going to change the world. We felt like we could change everything.
We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
At the end of 2022, a corruption scandal shook the EU to its core.
Qatargate.
The Qatargate corruption scandal.
Lawmakers were arrested, accused of taking bribes from Qatar. But then, the case hit a wall, leaving us with lots of questions in an election year. Is the European Parliament for sale? And if so, what will it take for the EU to clean up its act? I'm Valentina Pop, and from the Financial Times, this is Untold: Power for Sale. Out now.
After Harvey Milk's groundbreaking win in San Francisco, a reporter asked John Briggs for his reaction. Briggs expressed surprise that Harvey had gotten elected. Then he told the journalist, "I'd say the people got what they deserved." If Briggs was a little salty, it might have been because his gay teacher ban had just hit a giant, unexpected snag. In the fall of 1977, his campaign collected more than 100,000 signatures for Prop 6 in just 30 days. They were already 1/3 of the way to getting it on the ballot for the June 1978 primary, which they hoped would boost Briggs as he ran for the Republican nomination for governor. Everything was going as planned, until the state attorney general told them there was a problem with their petitions. Ron Briggs, John Briggs' son, remembers that moment.
He says, oh, by the way, right here, title and summary. The title and summary is the legal box that you read in the polling place. He said, they're inaccurate.
The Briggs campaign had copied that legal language from the Attorney General's press release. But it turned out that release had a typo. That meant John Briggs' petitions were missing 7 words they were legally required to have. And as a result, every single one of those 100,000 signatures was invalid.
And so he throws the whole thing out.
What was your dad's reaction to that?
Well, it's the first time I ever heard him use the F word.
Prop 6 wasn't totally kaput, but the Briggs campaign would have to start from zero. And the June ballot was no longer a possibility. This was terrible news for John Briggs, and a huge break for the gays of California. They'd have more time to plan and protest and convince Californians that Prop 6 was dangerous and wrong. And in the meantime, they had a major milestone to celebrate.
As political parades go, it was a little unusual. Harvey Milk on his way to City Hall to be sworn in as a supervisor in San Francisco. At his side, his gay lover.
On Inauguration Day, Harvey led a march of his supporters all the way from the Castro. He was a pioneer, one of the first openly gay Americans to be elected to public office. At 47, he'd been active in politics for less than 5 years. For anybody else, it would have been a second act. But for him, it was kind of his first. He'd never really found his place or his passion before he got into politics. Now, he'd found where he belonged.
There was a celebration on the steps of City Hall when he arrived. Inside City Hall, the newly elected officials introduced their wives and husbands and families.
When Harvey stood up to speak that day, he was alone. His partner, Jack Lira, had already gone home.
In this state, there is a law that says gay people cannot be married, but there is no law that says two human beings cannot love one another. I have a loved one. Unfortunately, he is too nervous to be here. He left.
At the end of his speech, he promised to make disenfranchised San Franciscans feel heard.
I will fight to give those people who had once walked away hope so that those people will walk back in. Thank you very much.
Harvey had good company in that mission. The city's new district-based election system brought a huge number of firsts to the Board of Supervisors.
The first avowed women's rights advocate, the first Chinese American, the first black woman, and Dan White, a city fireman who gave up his job to take his seat.
Dan White was a straight white man, but his election was a first too. He was 31 years old, the youngest person ever to sit on the board, a police officer turned firefighter who had served in Vietnam.
Clean-cut, respectful to his elders, and seemingly possessed of small-town values.
It's old-fashioned values that built this country. To me, this is what society is all about.
White had been elected by a majority white, working and middle-class district. He won on a platform of fighting what he called the radicals, social deviates, and incorrigibles in San Francisco's cesspool of perversion. It all sounded a lot like John Briggs. But Dan White was an outlier. The election had swung the Board of Supervisors in a more progressive direction. For Cleve Jones, it felt like a fresh start.
City Hall was no longer a symbol to me of the establishment I had to overturn. City Hall had become ours.
Cleve joined Harvey Milk's office as an intern. He worked alongside Ann Cronenberg, Harvey's full-time aide, who was finally getting a salary.
When dignitaries visited, they used to roll out the red carpet, which went all the way down the beautiful grand staircase, through the rotunda, all the way out the front door of City Hall. And Harvey took every opportunity to walk up the red steps. And he would say, "You don't take the elevator ever." This was to make a show of the fact that, we're queer and we are going to prance up and down, and you are going to know we're here.
Harvey took great pleasure in pushing the buttons of the more moderate supervisors, particularly Dianne Feinstein, the president of the board.
I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be in City Hall. So I somehow managed to put together this cheap suit, and Harvey said, "No, I want you to wear your jeans." I said, "Really? In City Hall? That doesn't really sound proper." And he said, "No, I want you to wear tight jeans." He said, "It makes Dianne nervous."
As a supervisor, Harvey threw himself into the work, trying to prove to his constituents that he was every bit the advocate he said he'd be.
He goes into the neighborhoods of his district asking for opinions on the issues every night.
He was a pure populist before that word was ruined by the far right. He was about making sure the library had funding. He was about getting that intersection fixed.
At 9 in the morning, he's on the bus heading for City Hall. He wants to improve the transportation system, so he says if he didn't ride the bus, he'd be a phony.
Harvey had a theory about San Francisco politics. He said whoever solved the city's dog poop problem would be elected mayor in a heartbeat. He wasn't rushing on to higher office just yet, but he did introduce a pooper-scooper law.
He knew how to engage the press. So the day that the pooper-scooper ordinance passed, he held a press conference in Dubois Park.
Unbeknownst to the reporters, Harvey had taken his own dog to the park that morning and didn't scoop its poop. But he made a mental note of where the dog did its business.
So he planned the press conference around that site and then accidentally stepped in it.
Milk put his foot down to emphasize that the city intends to enforce, and you guessed it,
had everyone roaring with laughter as he shows the bottom of his shoe.
In Supervisor Milk's words, this really is the bottom line.
But Harvey's top priority was a different piece of legislation, something for his base, the gays of San Francisco. He wanted to push through a much stricter non-discrimination ordinance, one that would protect gay people in housing, public accommodations, and employment. With the Briggs initiative still on the horizon, Harvey hoped to get the board's full support to send the strongest possible message.
What the gay rights ordinance in San Francisco, the main focus is to prevent the people who are already employed, who are gay, who, if they want to come out, prevents them from being fired.
In the end, Harvey's non-discrimination ordinance passed, but it wasn't unanimous. Dan White was the only no vote.
Supervisor White says people are getting angry, and he believes that anger could lead to a backlash that will wipe out all of the gains the gays have made thus far.
The non-discrimination law was a done deal, but it wouldn't protect gay teachers if John Briggs got his way. And Harvey had more than Prop 6 to worry about. With all his newfound fame, he was getting inundated with death threats.
This is Harvey Milk speaking from my camera store on the evening of Friday, November 18th.
Not long after his election, Harvey sat down with a tape recorder and just started talking.
Knowing that I could be assassinated at any moment, or any time, I feel it's important that some people know my thoughts.
Oh yeah, I teased him about it. I told him he wasn't important enough to be assassinated. Nobody's going to kill you. It's not like you're Dr. King or Malcolm X.
We'll be back in a minute. Can't wait for next week's episode? Listen to it now. Immediately unlock all episodes of Slow Burn Gays Against Briggs by subscribing to Slate Plus. Your subscription also gets you ad-free listening across all your favorite Slate podcasts, plus other member-exclusive content. Join now by clicking subscribe at the top of the Slow Burn show page on Apple Podcasts, or visit slate.com/slowburnplus to get access wherever you listen. By the spring of 1978, it was undeniable. An anti-gay wave was sweeping the country. First, in April, Oklahoma passed a state law allowing school boards to fire teachers who were out as gay. Later that month was a vote in St. Paul, Minnesota, where conservatives inspired by Anita Bryant were working to repeal the city's non-discrimination ordinance. The campaign was ruthless.
There was an ad in the Minneapolis newspaper that said, gay rights. Sure, they have rights. They have the right to immediate extermination.
The anti-gay side won. Voters repealed the St. Paul ordinance by a 2-to-1 margin. In California, the man behind the Briggs initiative was watching.
John Briggs said that Dade County, Oklahoma, and St. Paul, Minnesota were only preliminary battles. He called his California campaign against homosexual teachers the main event.
Harvey Milk was paying attention, too.
What is your feeling about the repeal tonight in St. Paul?
Well, it's not unexpected. What is happening is 5-10 year struggle for freedom. and there's going to be a lot of defeats, and there'll be victories.
How do you think this will affect the Briggs forces in California?
Oh, I'm sure he'll get more signatures now. You know, you taste blood and you want more.
2 weeks later, in Wichita, Kansas, there was another vote to repeal a non-discrimination ordinance. This time, the anti-gay side won by a margin of 5-1.
38 other cities still have gay rights laws, and now there is concern among those in favor of equal rights for homosexuals that what happened in Wichita could happen in those cities too.
Back in San Francisco, all these votes felt like a warning sign. Even before the bad news started rolling in, Harvey had told his intern, Cleve Jones, that he needed to get the gay community mobilized.
One of the things he pushed me to do was to organize these street protests.
With each defeat that spring, Cleve helped the gays of San Francisco find an outlet for their anger and fear.
So first it was St. Paul.
No more St. Paul!
Then it was Wichita. So I became kind of well known as leading these midnight marches. 3, 5, 7, 9, lesbians are mighty fine. Anita, you liar, we'll set your hair on fire. It was that mix that sustains us a lot of camp humor and militant political rhetoric.
Before one of those marches, Cleve tried to conjure up a soaring speech that would move the crowd. He wrote something out on a yellow legal pad and carried it with him to Castro and Market Street. But when it came time to talk, he got flustered.
And it's wind and fog and everything, and the papers would rattle, and I'd lose my place and my beautifully crafted speech. Harvey said, you need to lose the notes. Just talk. When you're talking to a crowd of our people who are hurting or angry or jubilant or whatever, your job is to feel that energy from the crowd and speak it.
Cleve took Harvey's advice, and with every march, his confidence grew.
Our movement is powered by the determination of a people too long denied, a people seeking the freedom to live, to work, and to love.
And it got to the point where we didn't even have to put out the word. And there's an election defeat, and the next thing you know, there's 25,000, 30,000 people at Castro and Market.
With Harvey and a few other activists, Cleve had come up with a plan to marshal those massive crowds.
We had all witnessed the riots after Dr. King was killed. Harvey said, we're not going to burn down our own neighborhood.
When protesters gathered at Castro and Market, Cleve channeled their anger into physical movement.
We came up with this strategy to, march them till they drop. And we created the most insane march route you could think of. This was not a slow procession. This was, tens of thousands of pissed off gay guys and lesbians roaring down Market Street.
After 1.5 miles, the marchers would stop at City Hall, yell for a bit, then continue north on Polk Street.
And by now, of course, the march is getting bigger and bigger and bigger because there's still a whole lot of gay people living in the Polk area, and there's still gay bars in Polk. So out of the bars, into the streets.
Out of the bars, into the streets. Out of the bars, into the streets.
And we have 48 hills in this town, and some of them are really steep. And probably the steepest is California Street, which is a rather broad avenue with cable cars on it and hapless tourists caught in this. And we would march them up that damn hill to the very top, and then we would do a loop around Grace Cathedral, separate church and state, 2, 4, 6, 8, and then down Powell Street, the steep hill, to Union Square, and then most people would take the trolley home.
By then, everyone would be too tired to riot. The march would end in peace. Cleve and his army of demonstrators were alarmed by the rash of gay rights defeats that spring. But even with the Briggs initiative still brewing, there was reason to hope that the anti-gay wave might peter out before it got to California. Because the next big vote on gay rights wasn't happening in Middle America. It would be just up the West Coast in Oregon, in a city with a thriving gay community.
In the 70s, Eugene became what some fondly called the lesbian Mecca.
Harriet Merrick was a lesbian activist in Eugene. The city was home to the University of Oregon and known for its counterculture and student activism. When conservatives in Eugene started pushing to repeal its non-discrimination ordinance, it was inevitable that a new gay rights group would mobilize to fight back. Harriet became one of its leaders at just 26 years old.
We were all young, most of us with no experience, yeah.
Why did it fall to you, to, youngsters to do this?
We had our whole lives ahead of us. Some people had more to lose. And the fear of losing housing, the fear of losing family, the fear of losing their jobs, it was really, really strong.
The gay community in Eugene was as diverse as anywhere. There were older professional men, women who ran everything as collectives, apolitical people, radical students, conservatives, moderates, leftists, people who didn't even know each other existed.
What was it like trying to deal with all those factions in a meeting?
Like chasing chickens. It was sometimes just trying to keep people from not, poking each other's eyes out or something. Talking about people coming out versus people not coming out. If someone was a drag queen, is that going to be too scary for the general population?
But the Eugene activists made it work, drawn together by the feeling of a shared emergency. They rounded up 600 volunteers to defeat the referendum. They wrote plays and performed them. They spent $700 on buttons for people to wear around town, $3,600 in today's money. Momentum seemed to be on their side, until the conservative opposition switched tactics. At first, the anti-gay campaign in Eugene looked a lot like the ones in Miami, St. Paul, and Wichita. It relied on religious rhetoric, accused gay people of pedophilia, all the typical smears. But then anti-gay leaders ditched the Anita Bryant playbook. They even told Anita herself, "Don't come to Oregon. We don't need your help." Then they devised a new message, one they hoped would appeal to the city's many liberals and moderates. Instead of quoting the Bible, they focused on the text of the Eugene Ordinance, which protected gay people from discrimination based on their identity or conduct. That last part about conduct is what they zeroed in on. They said gay people wanted free reign to do freaky sex stuff in public.
My God, gay people are going to be out in the streets flaunting it everywhere, doing all this stuff right in front of your children.
That's another Eugene activist speaking on a panel in 1978.
They called this a special privilege. Gay people are asking for special privileges. They said that no other minority in the history of the United States had ever been granted protection on the basis of their conduct.
That argument was clearly false. People's religious practices are protected, and that's not an inborn trait. It's personal conduct, and it's a choice. But the framing was smart. The conservatives were saying that gay people didn't really want equality. They wanted rights that nobody else had.
I remember being in a room a couple times just going like, what special privilege are they talking about?
Harriet's group tried to counter that message. Between door knocking and phone banking, they contacted a full third of Eugene's voters. They also raised more than 3 times as much money as the anti-gay group.
And we're working as hard as we can to reverse the national trend and make Eugene a win for gay rights and for the human rights of all people.
On the eve of the vote, nobody knew what was going to happen. Surveys showed that voters were split right down the middle. Then came Election Day.
The voter turnout was lighter than expected, and predictions of a close election didn't come true. The residents of Eugene decided by a 2-to-1 margin against protecting homosexuals from discrimination.
We lost in Eugene.
Harriet's activist group had designated a few members to give statements to the media that night. But after the loss, they couldn't bring themselves to do it.
I think they were crushed. They had put an awful lot of work. They put their lives into it. They really believed that Eugenians were fair, and they would just rationally understand and see the great points that we made. The loss was just profound, and then it was scary, like, now what?
Some people had come out as gay specifically to campaign against the repeal.
It's like, am I in danger now? Am I going to be okay?
For Harriet, the vote was a wake-up call. It revealed exactly how many Eugenians were against her. She ended up moving to a neighborhood that was friendlier to gay people. And then she waited to see if the gays in California would win their fight and finally halt the anti-gay wave.
We knew the Briggs was coming down. The thought was just kind of like, oh my God, I hope one of them can stop this.
While cities across the country rolled back gay rights, John Briggs was on the rebound. After his first batch of petitions got thrown out, Briggs's California Defend Our Children campaign spent the spring of 1978 gathering hundreds of thousands of new signatures, more than enough to get his gay teacher ban on the ballot in November. And just 3 weeks before the vote in Eugene, he made it official.
Well, today, on behalf of California Defend Our Children, I have filed all over California some 500,000 signatures of California registered voters.
By California law, the campaign had to drop off its petitions in each county individually. For his first stop, Briggs didn't choose his native Orange County or Sacramento, where he worked. Instead, he came to Harvey Milk's hometown, the capital of gay America, essentially to rub it in.
Was there any specific reason that you chose San Francisco as the first city in which to file?
Yes, San Francisco is the most beautiful city in all of California, but it's also the moral garbage dump of homosexuality in this country, and that's why I came here today.
Standing on the steps of San Francisco City Hall, Briggs was already looking ahead, courting a nationwide audience.
When we put this national question to the people of this country, whether or not we're going to have homosexuals teaching immorality in the classrooms of California and in this country.
Is the issue just teachers, or is it homosexuality in general?
No, it's homosexuality in general.
In November 1978, the whole country would find out if this anti-gay message could ever be stopped. In Eugene, conservatives had adapted their strategy to appeal to more liberal voters. And it seemed like if they could win there, they could win anywhere. An early poll suggested that the vote in California wouldn't even be close, that the Briggs initiative would pass in a landslide, a repeat of every other vote that year.
The homosexual community in this country lately has been losing a lot of public votes, in fact, losing all of them.
The outcome of the November vote wouldn't just affect California or gay teachers. It would determine how far the anti-gay agenda could go. When gay people lost in Miami, St. Paul, Wichita, and Eugene, those were citywide battles. If the anti-gay backlash took hold in California, the biggest and gayest state in the country, that would be it. Gays would lose the war.
So if this past year is any measure, the future looks bleak for the gay rights movement.
Next time on Slow Burn. A fragile gay rights coalition is running out of time and cash.
And I remember I said, well, Gail, I'm told that lesbians can't raise money. And she said, watch me, bitch.
In the movement's divisions around politics, gender, and race all rise to the surface.
And kiss my happy, rich, black ass.
Hey Slow Burn listeners, the Slow Burn team and I have some exciting news to share with you. Slow Burn is hosting an exclusive taping at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City on June 13th, and I want to personally invite you to come out and see us. I'll be interviewing a few special guests, including civil rights activist and Black Lives Matter organizer DeRay McKesson, and Eric Marcus, the host of Making Gay History. We'll dive deeper into this season and talk about the lasting impact of the Briggs Initiative and the continued fight over LGBTQ rights in schools. Plus, we'll share some behind-the-scenes stories and never-before-aired tape from this season. It'll be the perfect way to celebrate Pride Month this June with LGBTQ stories and voices across generations. You won't want to miss it. Again, that's June 13th at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York. You can get tickets now at tribecafilm.com/slowburn or by clicking the link in our show notes. We're so excited to see you there. This season of Slow Burn was written and produced by me, Christina Cauterucci. Slow Burn is produced by Joel Meyer, Sophie Summergrad, and Kelly Jones. Josh Levin is the editorial director of Slow Burn. Derek John is our executive producer. Susan Matthews is Slate's executive editor. Merritt Jacob is our senior technical director. We had engineering help from Patrick Ford and Madeline Ducharme. Our theme music was composed by Alexis Cuadrado. Ivylise Simones did the cover art, which features an image of Silvana Nova from a poster designed by Larry Hermsen and the Too Much Graphics Collective. We had production help from Emily Gaddick, Canberra Moniz-Edwards, and Thaddeus Moore. Some of the audio you heard in our show comes courtesy of KSFO and the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender Historical Society. The recording of Harvey Milk's Political Will is from the Hormel LGBTQIA Center at the San Francisco Public Library. Special thanks to Isaac Fellman at the GLBT Historical Society, Lillian Faderman, Rami Khalil, Fred Fegis, Rachel Strom, and Deb Greenspan. And to Slate's Evan Chung, Madeline Ducharme, June Thomas, Brian Lauder, Katie Shepard, Seth Brown, Katie Rayford, Caitlin Schneider, Alexandra Cole, Joshua Metcalf, Heidi Strom-Moon, Hillary Fry, and Alicia Montgomery, Slate's VP of Audio. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Josh Levin. My podcast, The Queen, tells the story of Linda Taylor. She was a con artist, a kidnapper, and maybe even a murderer. She was also given the title the Welfare Queen, and her story was used by Ronald Reagan to justify slashing aid to the poor. Now, it's time to hear her real story. Over the course of 4 episodes, you'll find out what was done to Linda Taylor, what she did to others, and what was done in her name.
The great lesson of this, for me, is that people will come to their own conclusions based on what their prejudices are.
Subscribe to The Queen on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now.